All right, buckle up for a deep dive, everybody. We're heading into the world of international drug smuggling.
A world most people only see in movies.
Exactly. But we're going beyond the fast boats and daring escapes.
Yeah, we're going deeper.
You guys have sent us some pretty fascinating sources.
Legal documents.
Court opinions.
Even some social media posts.
And we're going to use all of it to uncover how technology and spirituality and the law, they all kind of come crashing together.
Yeah, and what's really interesting about this deep dive is we're going to be looking at the information from multiple perspectives.
Oh, that's cool. Like, whoa.
We've got the smuggler,
Yeah.
the law enforcement angle, and we even get a glimpse into the spiritual side of things.
Oh, I love that. Okay, lay it on me. Who are the players in this?
Well, we got Patrick Bowler,
Okay.
convicted back in 1977 for using a blue box to defraud a telephone company.
1977. Okay.
And we have Chris Butler, also known as Paramahamsa dasa,
Okay.
a spiritual leader
Hmm.
who has faced some pretty serious accusations within his organization.
Mm-hmm. And lastly?
And finally, we have Gregory Paul Timewell,
Okay.
an international drug smuggler
Gotcha.
whose story is somehow connected to both of them.
It's like a puzzle with pieces scattered everywhere.
You're right, it is a puzzle. And what we'll see as we fit these pieces together is that even seemingly unrelated events from different times can end up being connected
I love it when that happens.
in very surprising ways. So let's start with this blue box from 1977.
Okay.
Now, it might seem like ancient history
Uh-huh.
in the digital age,
Right.
but trust me, this case is going to be surprisingly relevant to the world of international drug smuggling.
All right, I'm intrigued. For those of us who weren't around in the 70s, what exactly is a blue box?
So Blue Box was a device that hackers or phone freaks, as they were called,
Phone freaks. I love that.
used to make free long-distance calls.
Okay.
Basically, they figured out how to replicate the tones the
Yeah.
telephone system used for billing
Uh-huh.
and basically trick the system
Mm-hmm.
into thinking they were authorized to make those calls.
So they were like hacking the system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Patrick Bowler was caught using one of these blue boxes to defraud Mountain Bill Telephone Company.
Ah, okay. So a clever way to avoid paying phone bills. But not exactly a victimless crime.
No, not victimless at all. It was considered fraud, plain and simple. But what's really important about this case is that it set a legal precedent about surveillance.
Okay, how so?
The courts ruled that using a snifter, which is a device that could detect those blue box tones,
A snifter.
wasn't a violation of wiretapping laws.
Okay,
Now, this becomes important later on,
I bet it does.
believe it or not.
Okay.
When we talk about the investigation of Timewell's smuggling operation
Uh-huh.
and how authorities gathered evidence,
Ah, a case about a phone hacking gadget in the 70s could impact a drug smuggling case decades later.
exactly.
I see where you're going with this.
Now, fast forward to the 1990s,
Okay.
and let's meet Gregory Paul Timewell.
Okay.
This wasn't someone dealing drugs on a street corner.
Ugh.
Timewell was a high-level operator, moving massive amounts of drugs across international borders,
Yeah.
we're talking about. A plan to smuggle 25 tons of hashish
Whoa.
through New York alone and millions of dollars in assets hidden across the globe.
Those are some serious numbers. How did he manage to stay under the radar for so long?
Well, that's the thing about these sophisticated criminal organizations.
Yeah.
They're designed to be elusive.
Right.
Timewell was good at what he did, but eventually even the best get caught.
Of course.
He was arrested in Canada in 1995
Okay.
and extradited to the United States to face charges.
So he's looking at a potential life sentence.
Oh, yeah. What happened?
Sex.
Faced with those kinds of consequences, Timewell decided to cooperate with the government.
Hmm.
He started providing information about his associates, their smuggling routes,
Okay.
and the intricate financial schemes they used to launder money.
Smart.
In exchange for his cooperation, he hoped to get a lighter sentence.
So he turned informant. That's got to be a risky move in that world.
It is.
What kind of information did he have?
Oh, he had the inside scoop
Okay.
on a massive international drug operation.
Right.
This wasn't just street-level dealing.
Gotcha.
Timewell had knowledge of the entire network.
Whoa.
From the suppliers to the distributors, he knew where the money was, how it was being moved, who was involved.
Wow.
This kind of information is gold to law enforcement agencies.
Yeah.
It could help them dismantle entire criminal organizations.
Okay, so I can see why the government might be willing to cut a deal with someone like that. But didn't you say there was a twist in this part of the story?
Oh, there is.
Late Ami?
While Timewell was singing like a canary,
Uh-huh.
he wasn't entirely honest.
Okay.
Turns out he had stashed away over 4.8 million Swiss francs in a secret Swiss bank account,
Oh, wow.
conveniently forgetting to mention this little detail in his cooperation agreement.
So he was cooperating, but still trying to play the system. Talk about risky business.
It certainly was. This omission put his entire agreement with the government in jeopardy.
Yeah.
He could have thrown the book at him for lying,
For sure.
but they decided to keep working with him
Really?
because his information was just that valuable.
Wow. That's quite a gamble for both sides.
Yeah.
The government risks looking lenient towards a criminal, and Timewell risks losing any chance at a reduced sentence if they decide he's not worth the trouble. What happened next?
Well, they charged him with making false statements to federal officers,
Okay.
but they didn't scrap the cooperation agreement.
Interesting.
And this is where it gets really interesting. The government continued to advocate for leniency in Timewell's sentencing, even though he had been dishonest about his hidden assets.
This case is full of twists and turns. But before we go down that road, let's bring in our third key player, Chris Butler, or Paramahamsa Dasa. You mentioned he was a spiritual leader, but also that there were some accusations against him. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes.
Oh.
Let's shift gears for a moment.
Oh.
Chris Butler leads a spiritual organization that has attracted both devoted followers
Uh-huh.
and some pretty serious criticism.
Okay.
He's been accused of financial exploitation, promoting harmful teachings, and exerting undue influence over his followers.
Okay, that sounds concerning. Can you elaborate on those accusations?
Sure.
What exactly are people saying about his teachings?
Well, his critics argue that Butler's teachings foster an unhealthy level of dependence on him and his organization. They point to his emphasis on the idea of being lower than the straw in the street,
Nice.
constantly reminding followers of their supposed sinfulness and worthlessness. Critics say this creates a power imbalance that makes his followers vulnerable to manipulation.
So a classic cult leader tactic, making people feel like they need him for salvation.
Some people see it that way. And this is where the story takes another unexpected turn.
Okay, here we go.
Social media posts brought to light a connection between Timewell, the drug smuggler, and Butler's organization. Remember that secret Swiss bank account Timewell was trying to hide?
Oh, yeah.
Well, it turns out that money was being used to make monthly payments to Timewell's family, who were deeply involved with Butler's organization.
Wait, so the drug money was being funneled to the spiritual leader's followers. Now, this is getting really interesting. What do you make of this connection?
Well, it certainly raises a lot of questions. Did Timewell's involvement with this organization influence his criminal activities? Was he using drug money to support them? Or was he trying to atone for his crimes through these payments? We'll have to dig deeper into the details of Timewell's sentencing and the accusations against Butler to try to understand the motivations behind his actions and the extent of the organization's involvement, if any.
Okay, so we've got this international drug smuggler, hiding millions, funneling money to the followers of a controversial spiritual leader, all while trying to cut a deal with the government. It's a tangled web for sure.
Oh, yeah.
What happened when Timewell's case went to court? Did they take into account his cooperation, even though he wasn't completely honest?
That's where things get really complicated.
Oh, okay.
The judge in Timewell's case was walking a tightrope.
Yeah.
On the one hand, he recognized how valuable Timewell's cooperation had been
Right.
in disrupting a major criminal enterprise. But on the other hand, Timewell had blatantly lied about a significant amount of money.
That's a tough position for a judge to be in. What kind of sentence did Timewell end up getting?
He was sentenced to 275 months
Whoa.
in prison, which is over 22 years.
Okay, so that's...
A hefty sentence,
Yeah.
but less than the 324 to 405 months
Right.
recommended by the sentencing guidelines at the time.
So he got some leniency, but still a significant punishment. I'm guessing his lawyers weren't thrilled with that outcome.
No, they weren't. They argued that Timewell's sentence was unfair
Okay.
compared to some of his co-conspirators,
Okay.
who arguably played a bigger role in the operation, but received lighter sentences because they cooperated fully and didn't try to hide assets.
Didn't one of his co-conspirators, Thomas Sherritt, even help a prison guard during an attack and get a much shorter sentence because of that?
Yes, that's right.
Wow. Okay.
And then there's the case of Stephen Johnson,
Okay.
another co-conspirator who, according to the government, wasn't nearly as cooperative as Timewell, but still got a sentence of only 180 months.
So Timewell's lawyers were basically saying he got a raw deal compared to these other guys. What was the judge's rationale for the sentence he imposed?
Well, the judge actually expressed frustration
Okay.
with what he perceived as inconsistent practices from the government
Okay.
when it came to plea deals.
Uh-huh.
He seemed to believe there was an unwritten rule
Okay.
that if a defendant lied, even a little, the government would automatically void the entire cooperation agreement.
But we heard from the prosecutor in your research that there's no such hard and fast rule. The government chose to honor Timewell's agreement, even with the lie, because his information was so valuable.
Precisely. So the judge was operating under a misconception about how the government handles these situations.
Gotcha.
This belief might have influenced his decision to stick with the 275-month sentence, even though he acknowledged Timewell's cooperation was mind-boggling.
So Timewell gets a longer sentence than some of his co-conspirators, possibly because the judge misunderstood the government's stance on cooperation agreements. That doesn't seem very fair. What happened next?
Well, Timewell's case had another twist.
Okay.
Remember, this was before the Supreme Court case, United States v. Booker,
Yes.
which changed how federal sentencing guidelines were applied. Before Booker, the guidelines were considered mandatory, meaning judges had very little leeway to deviate from them. But after Booker, the guidelines became advisory, giving judges more discretion in determining appropriate sentences.
Okay, so how did Booker affect Timewell's case?
Because his case happened before Booker, it was sent back to the original judge for reconsideration under these new advisory guidelines.
Okay.
This is known as a Crosby remand.
Crosby remand, okay.
The judge had to determine if he would have given Timewell a different sentence under these new circumstances.
So a chance for Timewell to potentially get a reduced sentence. What did the judge decide?
The judge ultimately decided to stick with the original 275-month sentence.
Really?
But again, his reasoning raised some eyebrows.
Okay.
He seemed fixated on this idea that the government had a strict policy of voiding cooperation agreements if a defendant lied, even though the prosecutor had made it clear that wasn't the case.
It sounds like this misinterpretation of the government's practices really impacted the judge's view of the case. Did Timewell's lawyers just give up at that point?
No, not at all.
Okay.
They appealed the decision,
Okay.
arguing that the judge had misapplied the Booker guidelines
Uh-huh.
and hadn't properly considered
Yeah.
the value of Timewell's cooperation or the sentencing disparities compared to his co-conspirators.
And what did the appeals court say?
They agreed with Timewell's lawyers. They basically told the judge to go back and reconsider the sentence again, this time without factoring in that perceived rule about voiding cooperation agreements. They wanted him to focus on the individual merits of Timewell's case, including his cooperation, the lies, and the sentences given to his co-conspirators.
So round 2 of sentencing for Timewell. Do we know what happened? Did he get a shorter sentence?
Unfortunately, the records we have don't include the final outcome
Oh.
of that second remand.
Oh, man.
You don't know if the judge ultimately reduced his sentence or is stuck with the original 275 months.
That's a shame. I'm really curious to know how it all played out. So we've got a bit of a cliffhanger with Timewell's legal saga. What about Chris Butler? Did any of those accusations against him and his organization lead to formal investigations or legal action?
We don't have any information about that either.
Okay.
It's important to remember that while there have been criticisms and accusations, we haven't seen evidence of any official investigations or charges against Butler or his organization.
So a lot of unanswered questions on that front. This whole deep dive has been full of twists and turns. But there's one more thread we haven't fully explored yet. You mentioned that Butler's teachings promoted an unhealthy level of dependence on him. Can you give us some specific examples of what his followers were being told?
Yes, let's take a closer look at Butler's teachings and how they might have contributed to the dynamics within his organization.
Okay.
Remember that concept of being lower than the straw on the street?
Yeah.
That's a central theme. In his teachings, he constantly emphasizes the inherent sinfulness and worthlessness of his followers.
That seems like a pretty harsh message. Is that common in spiritual teachings?
Well, some spiritual traditions do emphasize humility
Uh-huh.
and recognizing one's flaws, but Butler's approach seems to go beyond that. He uses very strong language to paint a picture of his followers as inherently bad and incapable of achieving anything good without his guidance.
So he's setting himself up as the only path to salvation.
That's the impression his critics have. They argue that this constant focus on self-deprecation creates a power imbalance that makes his followers more susceptible to manipulation and exploitation.
It sounds like he's creating a situation where people are afraid to question him or challenge his authority, even if they have concerns. How does this tie into the accusations of financial exploitation?
Well, if you believe you're inherently worthless and incapable of doing good on your own,
Yeah.
you might be more willing to surrender your financial resources to someone who promises to guide you to a better path.
So the classic cult tactic of encouraging people to donate larger sums of money to gain favor or spiritual advancement.
Some former members have reported feeling pressured
Okay.
to donate generously, sometimes beyond their means. They describe a culture where questioning Butler's teachings or the organization's financial practices is strongly discouraged, even seen as a sign of spiritual weakness.
That's concerning.
It is.
It creates an environment where people might be afraid to speak up, even if they suspect something isn't right.
Exactly. And this lack of transparency and accountability is a common red flag in organizations accused of cultic behavior. It can allow for financial and emotional abuse to go unchecked.
So we've got Timewell, the drug smuggler, potentially entangled with a spiritual leader whose teachings might create an environment ripe for manipulation.
It's a complex situation with a lot of nuances.
Yeah.
We're piecing together information from various sources, but we don't have all the answers. And unfortunately, we may never know the full truth about what happened in Timewell's case, or whether any action was ever taken regarding the accusations against Butler.
Man, it's amazing how these seemingly separate threads, we got like a 1970s phone hacking case,
Right.
a high-stakes drug smuggling operation, and a controversial spiritual leader. It's crazy how they all weave together in this story.
It really highlights the interconnected nature of events, doesn't it?
For sure. Like how something that seems insignificant at the time can have ripple effects years later.
Exactly.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, let's revisit Timewell's legal battle one last time. Okay. The appeals court sent his case back for resentencing, instructing the judge to reconsider the sentence, without that misconception about the government voiding cooperation agreements.
Right.
So did anything change for Timewell?
Well, unfortunately, the available records don't show what happened after that second remand.
Oh, no.
We don't know if he ended up serving the full 275 months,
Oh, man.
or if the judge decided to reduce his sentence.
Ugh, it's like a book with the last chapter missing.
It is.
That's so frustrating. I wish we had that final piece of the puzzle. What about Butler and his organization? Did those accusations ever lead to any formal investigations or charges?
Based on the information you've shared, it doesn't appear so. We haven't seen any evidence of legal action being taken against them.
Okay.
And it's important to remember that accusations are not the same as proof.
True. So we end this deep dive with some lingering questions. Did Timewell ultimately get a fair sentence? What became of Butler and his organization? And I guess even a bigger question, what do you think?
Well, it's certainly a case that leaves you pondering those questions. And perhaps a larger question for you to consider is this: how much weight should a person's cooperation with authorities carry? Even if they haven't been entirely truthful, is there a point where the value of their information outweighs their dishonesty?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, it makes you think about the balance between justice and pragmatism.
Right.
Sometimes to catch the bigger fish, you have to make deals with people who might not deserve a free pass.
Exactly. It's a complex dilemma that goes to the heart of our justice system.
This deep dive has been a real eye-opener. I mean, we started with a phone hacking gadget from the 70s.
I know.
And ended up exploring the murky world of international drug smuggling and, the ethical complexities of plea deals. Yeah. It just goes to show that sometimes the most fascinating stories are hidden beneath the surface, just waiting to be uncovered.
You've uncovered a truly captivating story here, and the connections between these individuals and events are a reminder that things are rarely as simple as they seem.
It's always worth digging deeper, exploring different perspectives, and challenging your own assumptions.
Could not have said it better myself. And for you listening, we hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity. Perhaps it's inspired you to do a little digging of your own. Research these individuals further, explore the court documents, and see what other connections you can uncover. Remember, information is power, and sometimes the most interesting discoveries come from the most unexpected places. So until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those critical thinking skills sharp.